is the most idiotic human being you have ever met? When we were all younger and dumber, one of my closest friends married the craziest Kevin I've ever met. My friend had just come off of a very bad relationship that she'd been certain was going to end in marriage. In reality, the guy was cheating on her while using her to support his wannabe pro golfer existence, then dumped her when someone with more money came along. So she was in a bad place. A few months later, Kevin appears. The first time I met Kevin was when the two of them showed up at my apartment to announce their engagement. Since I'd met the previous guy that she was seriously dating just a month before, I know they couldn't have been seeing each other very long. Turns out Kevin proposed 5 weeks after their first date. Maybe she was a bit of a Kevin too for saying yes at that point, but like I said, bad place. It's hard for me to accurately describe Kevin without dipping into being mean. Because I never liked him from that first meeting. It was like he really wanted to be one of those hyper-masculine manly men but didn't quite know how. He liked to take any opportunity to bring up in conversation that he was a black belt. I remember the first time he said it because I asked, "Oh, yeah, in what?" And he looked at me like I was an idiot and said, "In martial arts." Oh. Right. Of course. He also would talk, at length, about how much he worked out. Turns out, he didn't actually work out at all. He also liked to think of himself as a car guy, because he had a sports car he couldn't afford and treated it like his baby. He didn't actually know anything about cars, but he had one. So, car guy. But the thing that really got up my nose about the guy was that he prided himself on how very smart he was. He'd make the most outrageous claims with the most pig-headed certainty. He just knew these things were true. If you disagreed, even if you showed actual physical proof that he was wrong, he'd just condescendingly tell you that you didn't understand these things like he did and go on with his idiocy. Just as an example, he once declared that you can't break the law at night. What exactly does that mean? We still don't know. He wouldn't elaborate. As a second example, he had trouble getting a fire going in their fireplace when he was home alone one day. His solution? Mix up some homemade napalm from a recipe he found on the internet. It was a huge disaster and it ended with him setting the kitchen on fire. Luckily my friend arrived home in time to grab the fire extinguisher. Yet he insisted doggedly that he knew what he was doing, and really this was the best way to get the fireplace going. He claimed that obviously she just didn't understand because she didn't know as much about this stuff as he did. Kevin was also a religious nut. I don't mean he was crazy because he was religious. I've known many wonderful, intelligent religious people in my lifetime. Kevin was a crazy person who used religion as his mo. He would randomly proclaim, "The Bible says," to support whatever other crazy thing he'd said. Most people let him get away with it, because, hell, the Bible is really long and says a lot of crazy stuff. Who could say that, somewhere in there, it didn't actually say whatever insane thing he was claiming? And besides, who wants to confront crazy? Even when the claim was something insane like, "The Bible says that birds are of the devil," he said this one day when he was angry at birds for some reason. I was raised going to church twice a week, once upon a time. So I knew a bit about that particular book, and I had a pathological need when I was younger to call people on their BS. So we often butted heads. Unsurprisingly, when confronted, Kevin could never actually tell you where in the Bible it said you shouldn't take the first slice of pizza, but it didn't decrease his certainty that it was in there. So, as anyone but the two of them could have predicted, the marriage didn't last. He became increasingly erratic, forbidding her from speaking to friends including me, because, the Bible says so. Hitting her, because the Bible says she has to do whatever he says and that he's allowed to beat her if she doesn't, stuff like that. So she left, and here is where the wackiest Kevin-ing begins. She gets a lawyer to initiate divorce proceedings, and the first thing that comes up is the house. They bought the house from his parents. More precisely, she bought the house from his parents. He had terrible credit. As a result, his name wasn't on anything related to the house. He also had no job. Meaning he'd never made a single payment on the house. As far as she saw it, the house was hers. His mother, who came into town to support her son through his misfortune, didn't see it that way. They declared that the house still belonged to the mother and threw all of my friend's stuff out on the lawn. My friend's lawyer gets a preliminary hearing date set up, to determine the initial dispersion of important stuff like the house, at least until the divorce proceedings get all sorted. My friend's lawyer says to Kevin, "Have your lawyer contact me to set up a meeting before the hearing." A meeting is set up, and who arrives at the lawyer's office but Kevin, dressed in jeans and a windbreaker, claiming to be Mr. Spector, the lawyer. I kid you not. He decided he'd be his own lawyer and called himself Harvey Specter, which come to find out is a character from some show he'd watched. I don't know how the initial meeting went, but when the time for the hearing came, Kevin was once again acting as his own attorney. This time I can only assume he wasn't working under a pseudonym. Keep in mind, the rest of this is totally going off of her story to me immediately after the hearing. Kevin and his mother arrived 20 minutes late, not at all dressed for court, casual jeans and shirts. The first thing he says when he walks in is, "Can I approach the bench?" "Why?" the judge asks. "Because I have some receipts." So my friend gets called to the stand. Her lawyer asks a bunch of questions illustrating just how crazy Kevin is and how bad things had gotten in about the house and stuff. Then Kevin, since he's the lawyer, gets to cross-examine. His first question: is it not true that you were beaten as a child? Her lawyer: objection. The judge: sustained. The question had nothing to do with anything. Other questions included: is it not true that you were seeing a psychiatrist and on medication for depression? No. It's not true. She'd never seen a mental health professional. Not sure if he thought he might trick her into lying on that one or if he was so crazy that he actually thought it was true. He asked a bunch of other ridiculous questions, which her lawyer let him ask because they were completely out of nowhere and just helped prove to the judge how nuts he was. Then he takes the stand. Her lawyer gets him to admit to pretty much everything they said he did, because it was all true. But he refuses to give specific answers to some of the more serious questions. He doesn't say no and just doesn't want to give specifics. Then he gets to make a statement. His statement is how he doesn't want a divorce and also she was abusive to him, such as pinching him once when they were on the highway. Also, the Bible says that she's his wife. So she has to do whatever he wants, and that divorce is bad. How can the judge make them get a divorce when the Bible says not to? Apparently he went on in this vein for a while. She just gave me a couple of the highlights. Needless to say, the initial hearing did not go his way. She ended up getting the house in the short term and a protective order against him after he admitted in court to his violence against her. Once again his justification was that, the Bible says it's okay, though. After this, he dragged his feet at every point of the process. For more than 6 months he wouldn't show up to things or would refuse to sign things until the last possible moment. He moved to a different city and apparently joined the Army Reserve. When my friend found out about this, her lawyer contacted someone there to point out that he wasn't allowed to be around weapons because of the protective order. The lawyer even contacted him and offered to drop the protective order so he could stay and if he would just agree to finish the divorce proceedings in a timely manner. Kevin refused. In the end, he got pretty much nothing and quietly disappeared.